Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith and no chattering teacup, no CEO, no PAs here with me at the moment, but a guest from the Emerald Island, an Englishman in Ireland, Robert Craven. Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion.
Thank you very much for having me, Edith.
Thank you very much for being here. And like I said before we started the recording, seeing what you are wearing, the teacup would be envious.
Yeah, it's pretty mild here.
Unlike where we are. And it will be warmer next week. Oh dear, I'm afraid already. You know?
As we always say in Ireland, you can tell it's summer because the rain gets warmer.
Yeah, there might be some rain. Let's hope there will be some rain because it's very much needed. But we are here not to talk about the weather. I know you're an Englishman. That's what you prefer to talk about, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I'm actually first generation Irish. I was born in Manchester, and my folks emigrated to Ireland in the late 70s.
Okay.
So I'm an Irishman longer than I've been an Englishman.
Okay. So, like I said, we do not have to talk about the weather. We talk about your book. We are here to talk about your book. Absolutely. Book number 2, Malign Intent, A Murder for Crowe. Book number 2, like I said. And it was quite a ride. It's not just about the beauty of Ireland, but there's a lot sinister stuff going on in your book. Your main character is a little bit of a nuisance, to put it mildly. A bit like a dog with a bone.
He is indeed. Dogged is definitely his word.
Absolutely. And Robert, what can you tell our listeners about this book?
Okay, the story centers around essentially a detective who has fallen on hard times. He's out of work. He's been suspended. He's lying low in a small town on the east coast of Ireland, and he has just inadvertently walked into what could be a possible murder investigation. I'm always fascinated by power and how power is acquired. And he is the closest senior investigating officer to a suspected suicide, but his instincts tell him almost immediately it is not an accident or a misadventure, and his cop instincts start detecting a possible sinister undertow as the victim in question is a journalist who has had a long association of exposing corruption at the higher levels of Irish society.
Oh, okay. Your camera is frozen. Don't know why. You are not frozen on Zoom, but
no.
you're frozen
it's just
here.
Not a great signal. Yeah.
Never mind. We have good audio. That's important. We have you here.
That's the most important part. You can just use the screen grab.
Absolutely. It was interesting to read about the people he has to investigate. Let's put it that way. We're talking about a Chief Justice and his ambition, a very ambitious man, but also a man with a past or things he doesn't want to become known. Because, like I said, he has ambitions for Europe, and that's not well liked by people like him.
Yeah, well, what I sort of wanted to do was, in some ways, A Malign Intent is a bit of a Western. It's a bit like the local sheriff comes across the corrupt power grab that's going on. Barry Gartland is based on, I suppose, the kind of 80s politician that Ireland was kind of riddled with. We don't have them anymore, which is always a good thing. And he's essentially trying to distance himself from his past and becoming a sort of nouveau riche kind of character.
Absolutely. And I mean, the victim in this case, I mean, his past is also interesting. And it is more than just an interesting past. I mean, his private life is unusual. And there has been a lot of change in Ireland. it feels a bit more so than in Austria, although we tend to like to think of ourselves to be so, enlightened. And yet, when you look at other countries, which, like Ireland or, for example, Spain, have been under the thumb not only of the Catholic Church, but...
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's kind of like the four pillars of Irish society: the judiciary, the church, the Gardaí, and the legal profession. So the sort of how I picture Crowe is he's constantly at odds with a lot of this, because at the end of the day, he's a decent policeman. And I use the line, no matter how finely it's dressed up, to Crowe, murder is murder. And he will fight for the underdog at every opportunity. But his manner and his demeanor does put him at odds with the optics of a criminal investigation and a police force that certainly likes to see itself as clean and incorruptible.
I think it's not just in Ireland the case.
So you say again?
It's not the case just in Ireland. I think that's something inherent in the police force worldwide.
Yeah, I think, there's good and bad in every organization. And certainly one of the sort of more sinister elements is that they have a kind of what's called a tip staff who represents the judge and acts as a factotum. And he is very much an old school sort of bent copper.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, this attitude of the police, like you said, we are a little bit above the law. And those who are good coppers, like you said, they don't believe, or sometimes they don't believe there are others who are not, because one of my grandmother's brothers, he was a policeman in Austria. Right. And it was always a very touchy subject to talk about, police officers who were not that straight and narrow, because he was, of course. Yeah, and therefore everybody else was, or at least he thought so.
I suppose it's kind of almost like these characters are almost drawn to each other. They know there's a certain degree of corruption, and they certainly interact with each other. And what I'm trying to do with Crowe is to kind of create a pretty unfavorable and unsavory character, but he's fundamentally good, and he fundamentally has the right reasons for doing what he does, but he's constantly winding up in trouble with it. The journalist who I have as the victim, he too is a sort of thorn in the side of the establishment. He was constantly asking the wrong kind of questions, not playing the game. And eventually he's forced out of his profession and then has to sort of live a sort of hand-to-mouth existence after that. And then I coupled that with a debilitating disease with him as well. That the odds are stacked up heavily against my characters, but they always try to find a way to get the result that they seek.
Not only professionally, but also in their private lives, because Crowe is a man who has lost a lot. His wife.
Yeah.
The relationship with his son is not so good. Maybe also because he's a teenager. I mean, teenagers,
But you see, it's a follow-on from the first book, which was called A Kind of Drowning. And it's drawn from the experiences of other people during COVID who were in their 50s and suddenly made redundant. And quite a few of them took it as a shock to the system. So what I want to do is create a character right at the base level. Everything has been taken away from him. And he does have a history of violence. He does have a breakdown. He does attack his wife and son. He's not a nice guy in a lot of ways. So what I sort of see over the progression of the next few books is how he comes from the very lowest point, sort of to coin Steven Spielberg. You put a character up a tree, you throw rocks at him, and then you try to think of a way to get him back down. And that's how I'm thinking of the character arc, particularly with Crowe, that eventually, if the books do well or I get the inspiration, I will have him coming back to being a fully back into the fold policeman.
Okay. And you have this character also in your book, this female police officer. He meets when he is moved to a very small police station. She was
Yeah,
interesting. Will she make a reappearance? Or
she
rather
is
not?
going to make
Ah,
appearance. Yeah, I'm
okay.
very fond of Yvonne Nesbitt. She's based roughly on our Irish Olympian Kelly Harrington, who's a
Okay.
very accomplished boxer. She's a street fighter, and
Okay.
when the most interesting part of writing is that sometimes a character leaps off the page that you're kind of playing with. And I liked her so much in the first drafts that I kept her all the way through it and developed her. So certainly I'm kind of working on a framework for the third one, and she will make a comeback. Because once again, she sort of skirts the outside of the law in a lot of ways and is inclined to, her nickname is Taser. She's inclined to be trigger happy, and I just loved her. The great thing about writing, I think, is that although you start out with a plan, these characters literally sort of appear on your shoulder and make the book so enjoyable to write as well. It's an interesting kind of process.
It's also enjoyable to read from the reader's point of view.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's not just about landscape, it's about these these people you've in your book, these characters, like we said, this chief justice who is full of himself, his wife, she's also full of herself.
Yeah.
And yet when you learn a bit more about them, you realize, why are they so full of themselves?
Yeah. It's it's an interesting kind of concept. I'm quite interested in how they come to power, because before he was a chief justice, he was basically a very shrewd operator. He was playing the legal system to his advantage.
Yeah,
And he finds
you called him ambulance chaser.
Yeah, ambulance chaser, literally. Yeah. So once again, I'm kind of interested in how veneers of respectability are built up, but there's still a very rotten core to the characters.
Is it more? Do you think is that more visible in people who came to power this way, like he did, or is it also visible in people who inherited their power? Do they act differently?
It's an interesting point, actually. What I sort of do is he's sort of based on a number of individuals I've met through my working life, people who have just have a degree of ruthlessness and are quite, what's the words I'm looking for, malleable to suggestion and pretty much on the upward curve and pretty much will take power at every cost. And he sort of manages to become a sort of gentrified country gentleman. And once again, it's just pure bad luck on his part that Crowe just happens to be in the town at the same time. It's very much kind of unchecked, well, basically unstoppable power. He's on his way to Europe, but there's just one slight problem, and that's Crowe. So he has to start thinking of ways to eliminate him.
And the way you describe also this situation in the police, you just said it yourself, these changes that happens. And Ireland is a prosperous country, or was for a very long time a prosperous country, influx of people. And is it also the case that to save money, like we do here in Austria and everywhere else, the police force is reduced and it becomes easier for certain kind of people to do what they do?
That is true. We had an economic collapse in 2008, which brought the country pretty much to its knees, and an awful lot of the public services were cut back on, which were never really sort of restored. And one of the elements was the police force. We live in a small town in Dublin, and the Garda station, or the police station, has been closed for pretty much 11 years. The town's expanding, but we don't actually have a police station, and it was closed for cutbacks. So the beauty about living in such a small town is that I can draw on all of the surrounding area and surrounding businesses, and I think they make a very good backdrop for the story. I think location and atmosphere are as much a character in any book as the actual people who are moving around.
Mm. Yeah, it's the same here in Austria. I mean, we did have a police station where my parents lived in a village near the border of Slovakia, and it's growing and growing. More people
Yeah.
live there, and we do not even have a police station.
Yeah, yeah. So, that gives me this great kind of canvas to start building the picture of what Crowe's life is like. Really, he was a Dublin metropolitan murder detective. He pretty much was at the top of his game. I haven't come to a sort of idea as to how he has fallen, what the trigger is, but I do have him at rock bottom in a small town, and it's literally the kind of the old cliche: a stranger wanders into town with a monkey on his back and a mystery to solve.
You get the impression when you read the book and when he talks to his representative from the union,
Yeah, yeah.
he doesn't mind to get sent there because it makes it easier for him to solve the mystery.
Exactly. Yeah, he manages to wrangle his way in there. That's one of the qualities about Crowe. He does not give up, and he will pretty much drive everybody mad in the process of trying to get his way. One of the funniest lines I thought was that many years ago I was out in Belmullet, which is the far end of the west of Ireland. It literally is the next parish is Boston, Massachusetts. It really is the middle of nowhere, and I had that threat hovering over him, and also having him on the border with Northern Ireland, checking cattle tags, giving him the worst possible jobs imaginable. So I tried to keep the humour dark. And yes, it's kind of very much based in Ireland with the Irish humour. But at the same time, it could be anywhere. It could be New Mexico. It could be the outback of Australia. It could be South Africa. It's a kind of common story of a man thrown in at the very bottom and trying to work his way back up again. I think he has to ask himself why he became a policeman in the first place. I think that's lost along the way.
Yeah. And you said there are these pillars there were these pillars in Ireland, Irish society, what is important, who has or who had the power. Yeah. And you have the judiciary with the Chief Justice, you have the police, and you also have the church.
Yeah,
in a way.
Yeah. So it's quite an interesting idea that he's already pitted against three of these elements at the same time. The journalist Angus Hannafin would be horrible to all of these other people because he's a journalist, because he's gay, because he's unrepentant, and he likes to expose people.
Yeah.
So it was quite interesting playing about with a character who's a priest without making him too cliche, because it's very easy just to have this priest and doing kind of priestly things. But having him work in the South African missions and making him a late vocation, and having lived a life that maybe suggests he did other things quite unsavory before he found his vocation.
Yeah.
There's all these undertows I like to play with.
Have you ever thought writing this book these books in first person narration?
I have. Funnily enough, when I was pitching A Kind of Drowning to a number of London agents, I had the very good fortune of having a 40-minute telephone conversation with Mark Lucas from the Soho agency in London. Now, Mark has nearly 4 decades of experience, and he was basically a Pan Macmillan agent. And he said to me that when he read the initial draft, why don't you have everything coming from Crowe's perspective? That everything comes from his eyesight, and that way you can get better kind of flow with his thought processes. You can then see his reaction to reactions to the way he interacts with people. And I thought that was very good. And the only time in Malign Intent I switched the point of view at all is when Clodagh, who's an ongoing love interest in the town, decides to meet him for dinner. And that's the only time I switch the point of view or the perspective of the character. I have thought about third person, but I think what sort of works for the actual book itself is how Crowe navigates the world and how he tries to learn from the fact he can rub people up the wrong way, but then he doesn't.
Well, on the one hand, I suppose it is first person is very intimate, but on the other hand, it is very limiting.
And it can be limiting, yeah, and it is a challenge, and I do agree. But I think part of it works in some ways because of that. Obviously, if I do develop the series, I will have to expand the timelines and the plots. But at the moment, I think certainly for A Kind of Drowning and also Malign Intent, it works. Now, these two books are a departure from what I'm normally used to writing, which is sort of spy books, and they're usually in the third person. So it was a different approach and technique, a different style, and I'm quite interested in police procedural. So what I want to try and do is try to move things away from cliche, try not to tick all the boxes, try not to follow the formula. But they were certainly two very challenging books simply because I had to completely change my style.
Ah, okay. And you said series. Was it planned like that from the beginning, or did it develop in this way?
Well, A Kind of Drowning started simply because Ireland had some of the most stringent restrictions during COVID. So I'm fortunate to live by the sea. And we did our 2-kilometer walk every day. And there's an island about 7 miles away from us called Lambay, which is privately owned. And I remember turning to my wife, Fiona, one day and saying, what if a body was found on that island? And then from there, literally, I'm stuck here in this town. I can't go anywhere. And then I thought, what would happen if a policeman was stuck here? What if he's fallen from grace and he still has to do his job? And that's where the idea came from. Malign Intent was an automatic kind of follow-on from that, because where I live, there's quite a lot of dilapidated greenhouses from the market garden era. And I thought, what happens if Crowe got stabbed in there? And that's where that idea came from.
Ah, okay, I see. Well, and as a writer, you said so yourself. You come from the spy novel writing, which I find also interesting. They take place during the Second World War, as far as I've gathered.
Yeah.
Interesting. Also, again, I also love that kind of mystery for the spies. But you've also written a steampunk novel, haven't you?
I did, yeah. The Mandarin Cipher. It's actually a great book. I loved writing it because I've always been drawn to the writings of Arthur Conan Doyle, H.G. Wells. I loved all those books as a kid. And steampunk became a fad for a while. And there was an American publisher looking for steampunk short stories. So I submitted one short story called The Properties of Mercury, but I wanted to keep it rooted in the Victorian era. So that got a good response, and they picked up the short story. And I thought, well, why not write another one? So I continued the characters on to what was called the Mandarin Cipher. And it was a very short book. It's a novella. I think it only clocks in at 30,000 words. And then I coupled it with The Properties of Mercury and re-released it. And it was an absolute joy to write. It was a very easy write. Maybe 8 or 9 weeks from start to finish.
And coming from spy novels, and now, like you said, it's something completely new for you, writing this police procedural. You said it happened to you during COVID. Maybe, may I ask, was it always a dream of you or the intent for you to write crime fiction one day?
No, it wasn't. When I wrote the war series, The Adventures of Ava Molinar, I only pictured a particular time frame, which starts in May 1933 at the book burnings in Berlin, and I finished it in the summer of set in the summer of 1946. Immediately after the Second World War, I took a very conscious decision not to do D-Day. So Hollow Point, which was the fourth one, is like almost 3 years afterwards for Eagles Hunt Wolves, which was the last one. And once again, what drew me to that particular last era was the fact that after the peace had been signed, Germany did not have a government or any form of administration for close to 6 months, which gave this huge. If anybody knows their history books, will know that Berlin was carved up between the the Allies and the Russians. And that gave me a really good scope for planting my spy character into there and a sort of a plot to reignite the war. So that was good. But I always vowed I would only do 1933 to 1946. I was never going to write another book after.
Mm-hmm. And would you say?
So I did have a plan.
Okay, with those books, okay. And would you say now that you've started writing crime fiction, is there a writer that you admire the most?
Well, I've recently discovered Joe Nesbo. I really like the way he writes. Patricia Cornwell, I like the way she writes in particular. And it's the two ones that really sort of jump out at me. So I'm a big fan of Nick Herron, The Slow Horses, but that's closer to spy and espionage. But it does give you the idea of how you can have kind of down at heel, downbeat, slightly failing people still getting there in the end. So that side of it appeals to me. Agatha Christie, read quite a few of her books. I'm a big fan of Agatha. I think she's a very good writer, and a lot of the books translate well today. Certainly one of my favorites, if my favorite, is The Murder on the Orient Express. It has it all. A great book, and still a great twist at the end.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's a new direction I'm going into. And of course, when I go into anything like that, I read everything I can lay my hands on. I've recently discovered Eric Ambler, who was a very good writer from the late 1930s. And his books are nearly 83 or 84 years old, and they're as readable today as they are. So it's opened new doors, I suppose, because World War II, you can research, and there's just thousands of books on it. But to go in a new direction, I'm enjoying that. It kind of takes the staidness out of writing.
Yeah. And comparing these two kinds of genres you write in, how would you describe your writing experience, writing for the one and the other? How does it differ?
That's a good point. One of the, I suppose I look at the Ava books, Get Lennon, Zin Man, A Finger a Night, Hollow Point, and Eagles Hunt Wolves, as a kind of my apprentice books. This is where I've made all the mistakes. This is where I've learned how to, I wouldn't say hone my craft, because the great Spanish cellist Pablo Casas was once asked at 90, why does he keep practicing? And he replied, I think I'm making progress. And I think that's a great line. So it's an evolution. It's quite interesting when you sit down to write. You do feel like you're starting all over again. And you do have to accept you've got to make the same mistakes, the same errors, the same, I suppose, what would format and structure. So what I have noticed is that when I look back at my early works, and sometimes I'm so embarrassed by them, but they're there and they're out there, and I have a huge sense of pride. But when I look at the later books, it's quite good to watch the evolution. Your style still stays the same, but your voice changes as you get older.
Does your voice also change between books? What I mean, do you recognize the difference between the spy books and the crime fiction books?
Yeah, I do. Well, you see, the spy books were always from a woman's perspective. I took a gamble on making the protagonist a woman, and she's sort of, I suppose, a James Bond with nail varnish. She's a staggeringly beautiful woman who moves through the Third Reich, and no one seems to figure out she's a spy. But it was good to write from a woman's perspective, or at least try to make a relatable female character. And I will admit, though, that it is World War II and it is action. But the later books, writing for different points of view and different perspectives, that's the interesting part of the process. You realize that when writing Crowe, it's a completely different discipline to writing the steampunk or the World War II.
Yeah. And now you have a main character in your crime fiction. Were you tempted to make your police officer female again?
I was tempted, and actually, funny you should say that. I wrote down recently who, if I was going to get an actress to play it, Frances McDormand would spring to mind, or
Ooh,
Olivia Colman. It's a role that a woman could play, I think.
yeah.
Crowe's got a very good heart. He's not very good around people, but he's a fundamentally, he's not a creep, he's a gentleman.
Yeah.
And he wants to do the right thing. And yeah, I think the role could be very easily adapted to a female. Absolutely no problem. But I think because he's kind of old, because he's kind of at the end of his career, he can get away with a lot more kind of murder than a young and up and coming police person could. Like, they're trying to get rid of him, and he really has nothing to lose by sticking at it.
Yeah, that's the impression I got in this book. That well,
Yeah.
as long
Like,
as
he's a dead man walking in a lot of ways, career wise. So
Yeah.
he just keeps going.
yeah. Well, as long as he finds out who did it,
Yeah.
that's all he's interested in. It
Well, I'm
seems.
not going to give away the twist on this.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
No, of course we do not want that. And another question regarding your writing experience or how you organize yourself. How would you describe yourself as a writer?
When I get into the habit of getting up at 5 o'clock every morning, I'm an early riser, I'm an early bird. So I'm usually up at 5, and I usually type maybe till 7:30 before I head out to work. And if you do that every day for 3 months, you have a book, which is what I do. So I have the first draft, and what I would then generally do after that is I put it in a drawer away for 2 months and try to forget about it. And then it goes the process of taking it down, having a look at it, and then starting to read it with fresh eyes. And then I hand it over to my wife, and she's very good with the pencil and the pen, and also give it out to beta readers. And what we generally do is that will take anywhere between 8 to 9 weeks. I take all the feedback back on, and then we start the rewrites. To give you an idea of a kind of drowning, that was done 13 times, 13 drafts before it was released. And with Malign Intent, the first draft, I scrapped nearly 55,000 words and took 3 of the key elements, which was the priest, actually the rock star who Crowe encounters, and Angus Hannafin. And I rebuilt the book up from there. So it can take anywhere between a year to 2 years to get a book out. And Malign Intent took nearly 3.
And
because I work for a living, I've got responsibilities. If you were to pin me down, I'd say I'm still a bit of a hobby writer or a retirement plan that has started early.
Okay. But do you plan before you start writing, let's say with spreadsheets and so on, or not at all?
Well, I'm actually a lot less sophisticated than spreadsheets. I generally buy notebooks. I kind of, I've thrown my wife mad now with the amount of notebooks I have, but generally what I do is I sketch out a rough kind of 25-word pitch. I imagine it's a pitch to a film producer. So I try to get it condensed to 25 words. From those 25 words, I'll write out round about a 50-word synopsis. And then if the synopsis on the 50 is still holding, I'll expand that to 100, 500. And if I have a synopsis that's anywhere between 800 words and 1,000, I have a pretty good book. And then after that, I start drafting chapters and scenes. And then I just take it from there. Generally, you can have the best laid plans out on a piece of paper, but the book will take a life of its own on.
And also the characters, don't they?
They do. I do have characters. Like I said, there's about 3 characters that came out of nowhere. One was Danny Razor in Malign Intent. The other was Harry Chew, which was a completely unexpected one, and he will definitely come back. And Yvonne Nesbitt. They were never in the first draft, but by the time I was working through it, they just arrived, and I worked them into the book.
He's also, now you mentioned him, Harry Chew, he's also an interesting character. Somewhere between the lines of,
Yeah, he skirts the edge. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, actually, now I'm sure he'll kill me for saying it, but he's actually based on the Hong Kong Irish designer John Rocca, who I met many, many years ago when he was running a small factory in a small town outside Dublin called Inchicore. And what I did do was that when I was creating the dialogue, I didn't want to go down the kind of Chinese cliche. So I watched loads of John Rocket interviews because he's kind of got a Hong Kong Irish accent, which is what I was looking for. So I created him that way, and he's a man who has many irons in the fire, and I want Crow skirted. Crow's prepared to get down there with the bad guys if he needs to get a result. So that's why I created this character. He's not corrupt, but he's borderline.
And speaking a little bit of organized crime, how prevalent is it in Ireland, do you think?
Like any economy, any Western society, we have gangs, we have criminal gangs, we have, it's like everything else. It's basically on the drugs trade, and we do have a hardcore element, but at the end of the day, the guards have to act, or the police in our country have to act within the law. So sometimes the bad guys get away with it, but it's like any society. There's going to be all kinds of unsavory elements within society, and the trick is to try and keep them under control.
And you said for the first book in the Harry Crowe series, the idea came when you went for a walk with your wife, like you did during COVID. So when did this plot hit you for book number 2?
Funny enough, one of the principal characters in it, Thea Farrell, she has Down syndrome, so she is going to turn out to be the victim. But I had her in an earlier kind of draft of a book that I was working on, of all things, a vampire book. But I liked her character so much, I brought her back in. But when I was growing up in Dublin, there was a fairly tough area I was in. And I always remember one of the guys had lost his thumb, and the rumor was that he'd had it cut off by a gang. So I decided to bring him into the story and create the criminal element. I think the criminality in the old days in Dublin was kind of a bit rough and ready, but the criminality today is far more sophisticated, and I think I'll probably explore that in the next one.
Sophisticated, do you mean more like cybercrime?
Cybercrime, I think a lot of these gangs coming up are very, very sharp on technology, Bitcoin, cybercrime, those kind of elements. That's another area I'd like to explore now. How would Crow tackle something like that, being an old dinosaur that he is?
He might need more help from the younger generation.
I think he's put the team back together at some stage.
Yeah. Also the youngling. Officer
Gene Redmond,
yeah. Okay, also, and Robert, what would be your advice for any other author out there?
I'm asked that quite often. My only advice really is to stick at it. I do suffer from writer's block. I do have dead days. And what I have tried doing is simply 10-minute rule, which is write a sentence for 10 minutes, write a paragraph for 10 minutes, or just sketch out a rough seed for 10 minutes. The only other advice I can offer is read constantly. There's I used to be in a band many years ago, and I came across this great quote by the bass player Steve Swallow. He's a jazz player, and he described his career as 50% playing and 50% listening. And I think that's a great idea.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's something a lot of authors say. What about the importance of the writing community for you as an author?
I think in some ways you can have a community of writers. I'm fortunate as an indie, I've got a good indie network. I will say that it's very good to have a network for critique, for feedback, for ideas and suggestions. But I am very fortunate that I am in touch with a lot of good writers both here in Ireland and abroad, the US and the UK. And yeah, I was at Newcastle Noir last Christmas as part of the festival, the Crime Festival. And I got to meet just so many great authors. And we're all the same. You know, we write gore and we write crime, but sit around and they're the nicest people you'll ever meet and hugely supportive. So a writing community, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Crime writers.
Which is why I like to share yours as well, in the hope that, you know, I think we're all out there. We're all trying to do the same thing and trying to do something a little bit different with our lives. So yeah, we should encourage each other.
Yeah. So Dr. Noir, she does a lot for crime writing.
She's great. She's a wonderful person. Yep. I actually dedicated a kind of drowning to her. She was just so supportive, and she's great in the sense that, you know, if you've got a doubt, you can have a chat with her, and she's always available.
Yes, that's true. That's true. She was on our show, and it's always 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 great to have her on. Also as a translator from Spanish to English.
Sorry, that again. Sorry.
She does also translate from Spanish.
Oh, yeah, she does translation. I didn't catch that bit. Yeah, she's a very, very bright woman. So, very bright woman.
And you said you were at Newcastle Noir. What about the other festivals? Have you intentions of going there?
Well, I was invited to Newcastle, so if I get any invites, yes, I'm always willing to give it a go.
Do you think indies are a bit too much under the radar?
At the moment, I haven't had any invitations. I'll be honest with you. Obviously, it's time consuming going to the festivals, particularly to the UK, and of course, it costs money. But I'm being honest with you. So I do have a book to promote. If I am invited, I will certainly consider it.
Yeah, I can understand. Yeah, money.
Oh, yeah.
Money and time. That's I mean, doing the things online, I mean, that's what they do with Crime Camry. And this year it was online, which was very much appreciated, also from my point of view, because you can't always go there. It's the same for us.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it was quite nice. I mean, COVID was not nice, don't get me wrong, dear listeners, but it was quite nice to watch from home and catch all the things.
There's, you look at it since COVID, since the advent of Zoom, these festivals now can actually be streamed and watched live. And I think that's a huge plus. And in some ways, you can get up early, log onto YouTube, get a little notepad out, and you might get some inspiration along the way. Yeah,
absolutely. All the things other authors have to say and how they work and how it worked for them and what advice they can give. That's also...
It's a lovely way to make a living.
Yes, and it's like you said, the writing community in your vicinity is important, or people you know, but also when you meet people, like you said, online and so on. Because my guest yesterday, Terry, he says he has regular Zoom meetings for his writing group. Yeah. And what he also said, what helped him with his writing is reading it out loud.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, they say that Hemingway used to have a table set up in front of a mirror in his typewriter, and he'd read it out to himself. So, yeah, there is a certain degree of I sometimes will actually record some pieces if I'm struggling with a piece of dialogue. I'll read it out, record it, play it back. And yes, hearing it read out, you can also hear all the mistakes in it as well.
And do you have these moments when you read it out loud or you reread it? Like you said, you have lots of drafts before it goes out there. Moments, scenes, when you read through them and you think, oh, yes, I did that. I'm so good.
That is true, actually. One of the biggest surprises sometimes when you finish a book and then you read it maybe 6 or 7 months later, like with no line intent, and you think, I can't believe I did that. It's quite common there.
Yeah.
And with pride.
Yeah, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
And when you said you have lots of drafts and you have lots of corrections, editing, and so on. When is the moment for you that you say, okay, let's stop it here?
Oh, that's always a good question. The moment I know I've stopped is when it no longer comes into my head at any stage during the day. When I'm not thinking about something, when I'm not plotting something, And sometimes even when I go to bed at night and I'm lying staring at the ceiling, or something occurs to me in the night, when all of those go silent in my head, the book is ready.
Okay. Interesting. And what about research? It's also something people might have trouble stopping because you fall down the rabbit hole, especially when speaking, for example, of your spy novels. I suppose you can get lost in the research.
Yeah, well, no, it's very easy to get lost in research. Certainly, when I was doing the World War II books, I was fortunate at the very start to meet a chap called Hugh McCracken, who was an expert on World War II, and he saw my early drafts of Get Lenin, and he came back to me and said, the Anoraks are going to have a field day with you. So one of the hardest parts I found with that book is putting the right weapon at the right time in the right hands. I'm researching World War II. I read and read and read. And at this point, it becomes, as you say, you spend more time researching than you do writing. Now, for the Crow series, I don't know any Gardaí at the moment. So what I have to do is I have to speculate. The way that the police work in this country is slightly different to any other police force. So I'm trying to look at Crow as an outsider, as a writer on the outsider looking in. So, I'm hoping to get in touch with somebody who can actually look at the book and say, oh, this is what needs to be done.
So, correct any mistakes?
I love reading. So research doesn't really bother me so much, but it is easy to fall down that rabbit hole of trying to get all the information.
Yeah, and like I said, maybe correcting mistakes regarding the procedure. Is that what you mean? Yeah. What about other experts? Because someone said, "Oh, I mean, all the authors say, oh, experts, they love to talk about their field of expertise."
Well, I was fortunate to get in touch with an English forensic company called Think Forensic, and they were hugely helpful with certain elements of a kind of drowning, because they talk about their specialist areas, forensics and death and investigation. So they are hugely valuable. And that leads me on to sort of mentoring as well. I'm fortunate that when I was writing this kind of James Bond book, The Road of 1,000 Tigers, it was set toward the latter half in Israel, and I do have a very good Israeli friend, Ella Schumann, who's a fine writer, and I sent the piece off to him saying, what was Tel Aviv like in 1957? And he lived there as a child, and he wrote back everything to me. So I think what I have found is that, yes, you can ask people for procedures, but generally people are very helpful, other writers as well. So, I'm okay on the forensics end of it, but, there are going to be gaps in how procedures happen. And then does the reader actually need to know the exact procedure, or will this slow the story down, whereas I like to propel the action forward? They can always look it up online, I suppose, at the end.
Yeah. And did you ever get an email or a review where it said, when one reader thought, oh, I know it better than the author? I have found out.
I did get a very odd review for Get Lenin when I was writing the book and pitching it. Overall, I got pretty good reviews. Some were negative, but I always remember one guy getting in touch and saying the 8mm handheld camera didn't exist in 1941, and I had to trawl back all the way through the book to see where I saw that. And I was thinking, well, okay, if that's the only thing wrong with it, I can live with that.
Yeah. It's always interesting what people think they know. It's also the most recent past. It's something someone said that you might remember not correctly. You think you know how it was, but then you start research and realize, oh, I was wrong. It didn't exist then, and so on. Yeah.
But it was such a minor detail, it was hardly worth going back and changing it. It was just one person spotted that. So I can live with that.
Yeah, understandable. And Robert, what about your plans? You've touched upon the fact that you are making the Crow books into a series. So what can we expect?
The next one is, at the moment, it's going to involve a bookie found dead on a lighthouse. I'm actually its working title is Bookie on the Rocks. So at the moment, I've got a rough outline, and again, it's going to fall on Crowe's patch, but it's going to happen on Christmas Day. So it's going to be the worst Christmas in Crowe's life.
Okay. And what about the other genres? Are you planning or have you ideas for other steampunk or horror?
Not steampunk. I did enjoy writing The Road of a Thousand Tigers and that kind of that James Bond era. I did enjoy writing Sebastian Holt, so I think at some stage he will definitely make another appearance.
Could you be tempted, now that I think of it, this Bond-like character you just mentioned, could you be tempted? Suppose.
Oh, well, I suppose, I think, if you were to say to me, what would be your dream gig, then the Bond gig would definitely be the one for me.
Okay.
I would love to have a good go at it. But I'd be interested more, again, age kind of fascinates me. I wouldn't be doing the live and let die kind of Bond. I'd be looking more Bond at the end of his days, a kind of a George Smiley, maybe a last adventure. And from the perspective of a very fit and very capable 51-year-old man.
So who, in your opinion, who would make the best Bond after the current one?
Opinion, well, actually, I think Bond should be a woman next. I had a recent discussion with another radio host who brought that up and saying, why does Bond have to be a man? And there's a really good series on Netflix the BBC made called Killing Eve, and I think Jodie Comer would be my choice for 007. I think she could ace it. If I was to write a book for Bond, I'd have Pierce Brosnan in my mind. I thought he was an excellent Bond. Of course, he's an Irishman as well, so we'll have to fly the flag.
Yeah, and he's so elegant.
And he's the right age, actually, to have another go at an old Bond.
I think so.
So, I kind of dabble with those ideas.
Oh, yeah. Intriguing. Absolutely.
Who would be your choice for Bond if you had a choice?
I haven't really thought about it, to be honest. I've been following the discussions, but of course there was this question of should it be a female, should the person be of color or not, or what? I'm not this huge Bond fan. I mean, I did watch my James Bond movies on TV. I don't know, as long as like I said, I mean, Pierce Brosnan is very elegant. He's, for me, the embodiment of James Bond, or he was. Yes, absolutely. Maybe Tom Hiddleston, I don't know. I mean, now that you've mentioned Jodie Comer, I mean, I loved her in Killing Eve.
Yeah, she's fabulous. I think she's a great actress. I think she could do a really good job, and they should let her have a go at it. But I think I was actually watching an interview with Michael Sheen, and he was saying, really, it's a bit like Doctor Who. It's an industry. It's funnily enough, when I was pitching The Road of a Thousand Tigers, I did have that down originally as a 009. I did a bit of research at the time, and he's the most frequent character that appears in the Fleming books. So I drafted the outline of what became the book, and I sent it on to the Ian Fleming Society. And I got an email back from them saying, no, you can't do this. You can't use Q. You can't use N. Can't use any reference to Moneypenny. Otherwise, we'll sue you. So, which is fine, fair enough. It's an industry. It's a brand, I suppose.
Yeah.
So that's why they invite authors to write rather than you pitching to them. But fascinating. So I just stripped everything down. I kept Holt's name, and then I gave them new departments, new adventures, and made no reference to the Bond universe at all. And it did okay.
And if they would ask you to write a new Bond like they did with Sophie Hannah and Poirot?
I don't know. If they ask me, I'll let you know.
But suppose they did.
Yeah, if I was pitching it, I would definitely possibly think of Jodie Comer. I would like to see a woman take that role on. I think women just make better spies because, they can change their hair, change their dress, change their makeup, change their whole overall appearance. Not so easy for a man.
True. And still in this day and age, women are usually underestimated.
Yeah, indeed. As the Ava books show, they constantly underestimate her until it's too late and they're lying in the gutter with their throats cut.
Yep, see? There you go. Robert, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
No, I would just say thank you very much again for inviting me on, Edith. It's a pleasure to talk to you. And please buy my books. I have a website. It's Robert Craven _author-Dublin. You catch all my books there. And I generally post up teaser chapters and all the information. And when you send me this, I'm going to link it to my website as well.
Splendid. Wonderful. So thank you very much for joining me, for being here, for being so patient. It was an absolute pleasure. Dear listeners, we hope you enjoyed this episode as much as my guest and I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see each other again at another episode of Book Lovers Companion. Until next time.